For millions of people, many still alive today, November 22nd, 1963 will always be remembered as the day President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. JFK had been the perpetual image of youth and hope for a nation struggling both socially and economically. He was the president who was going to push the United States into a new era of social and fiscal responsibility, an era in which every person was accepted regardless of their race, nationality, or socioeconomic status. To the Jewish community, JFK, as the country's first Catholic president, represented the large strides made to accept religious diversity in America. It was clear that President Kennedy was a friend to Israel and to the Jewish people. He chose a number of Jews to serve in his cabinet and in his government. Arthur Goldberg was appointed as Labor Secretary and then to the Supreme Court. Abraham Ribicoff was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and Mortimer Kaplan was the Internal Review Commissioner. President Kennedy was fatally wounded in Dallas, where he was fundraising for the Democratic Party Presidential Campaign Fund and was attempting to increase the number of Democratic voters in Texas. This shot, heard around the world, shocked the nation and sent it into a flurry of mourning. Across the country, religious leaders, including rabbis, were faced with the seemingly impossible task of determining how to comfort their entire community in the face of a national tragedy. It is lucky for us that Dr. Jacob Rader Marcus, historian and longtime director of the American Jewish Archives on the Cincinnati campus of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, recognized the magnitude of this event. He understood the importance of these sermons in capturing the mood and sentiments of the moment and sought to collect as many of them as possible for historical research. A sermon given by Rabbi Leonard J. Mervis of Oak Park Temple, B'nai Abraham Zion, my home synagogue, entitled The Silent Murderers, was delivered on November 29, 1963, exactly 1 week after the assassination. It is clear from this sermon that Rabbi Mervis struggled with how to preach on the day after Thanksgiving, a day that should have been filled with joy and thanks, and instead was filled with sorrow and tears. Rabbi Mervis did not try to hide behind the holiday. Rather, he put into words all the emotions that his congregants, like the rest of the country, had been experiencing over the course of the past 7 days: grief, sorrow, reflection, shame, and humility. Interestingly, Rabbi Mervis did not hold the assassin solely guilty for his crime. Rather, he expanded this guilt to the larger American community, stating, "We will make a mistake if we conclude that the late president was murdered by an assassin's bullet. He was murdered by the violent temper flaring in the American people." What did Rabbi Mervis mean by that? Rabbi Mervis expands upon this statement by saying that murder is one piece of the physical violence against Lyndon Johnson in Texas in the last election. It is of a piece with the mob setting upon Adlai Stevenson in Dallas, a piece with the murder of Medgar Evers, a piece of the wanton slaying of Negroes in Birmingham, of a piece with cruelty heaped upon the Negro in Mississippi. It is of a piece with the hypocrisy of Governor Wallace. It is of a piece with the dogs, animal and human, of the police force in Birmingham. Only a few radical thinkers perpetrated all of these acts of violence, and yet it was the entire nation that was at fault for not taking a stand to prevent these acts from occurring. As Rabbi Mervis so powerfully illustrated, JFK's murder was a symptom of a much larger problem in America: the social ills of a nation that was struggling to learn how to accept people of all races, nations, and religions. A terrible pattern of violence had developed in America, and American citizens were allowing that violence to go on instead of standing up against injustice. Rabbi Mervis was calling for the people listening to his sermon that day to stand up and take action. If they were not willing to fight for what they believed in, if they were not willing to get their hands dirty in an effort to promote social responsibility, then they were, in a way, all responsible for the death of the president. Rabbi Mervis quickly turned around the tenor of his sermon to end on a more positive note. He focused, in particular, on a quote from President Kennedy. As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. This was also Rabbi Mervis's message that day. Rabbi Mervis chose to challenge his congregants, not as Jews, but as American citizens, to take President Kennedy's message to heart. He proposed that all people, regardless of race, nationality, income, or religion, should live by the words on which the nation was founded. I believe that the final words of Rabbi Mervis ring true to all of us, even 50 years after the assassination. He said, "The right and the left, the rich and the poor, the middle class and the laboring class, the North and the South, the educated and the uneducated, whites and Negro, Protestant, Catholic, and Jew, let us live by the words upon which our nation was founded, of justice and equality for all."